Now the last mincemeat recipe I want to show you is a recipe for mincemeat, apple and nut strudel. And strudel is very easy to make nowadays because you can actually buy packets of ready-made strudel pastry in the supermarket. You keep it in the freezer, and when it's defrosted you just take out a few sheets, whatever you need, and then you can refreeze it again because it doesn't have any fat in it. Now to make the strudel, I've got 4 sheets of phyllo pastry here, and they're under a damp tea towel. It's very important when you take them out to put them under a damp tea towel because they dry very quickly. And over here I've got a very well greased baking sheet. Now here's the phyllo pastry, revealed in all its glory. What I'm going to do is take 1 sheet at a time and transfer it to the baking tray. It's quite delicate, so you have to sort of treat it quite gently. Here it comes. That's the first sheet, so that goes on the baking sheet. And don't worry if it overlaps the edges because they're going to be tucked over. Now the first thing that happens is I'm going to brush it. Remember, it hasn't got any fat in it. I'm going to brush it with melted butter, like this. I've got in my saucepan here 2 ounces of melted butter. And then I've got a mixture here of 2 ounces of chopped toasted almonds and 1 ounce of breadcrumbs, and they're going to be sprinkled over the phyllo pastry like that, 1/3 to begin with. Now I'm going to have another sheet of pastry, carefully lifted and put over the top, and then we just repeat the whole performance. Now I've done that 3 times altogether now, and I've used up all the breadcrumbs and the almonds, and now I'm going to put a final layer of strudel pastry on top of there. That's the final one. And now a little bit more butter over the top. This is the last lot of butter now. And then it's going to have a filling of 8 ounces of mincemeat, and that's been mixed with 4 cooking apples that have been sliced. And it's got other things. It's got the grated zest of a lemon and the grated zest of an orange. And then I've also used some spices, 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon and 1/2 teaspoon of mixed spice, and more nuts. I've used 2 ounces of chopped pecan nuts. This is apple, mincemeat and nut strudel. Now there's some juice from the apples there. I'm not going to put that on because it'll make it soggy. What I need to do next now is just make that into a reasonable shape all the way along the pastry, like a sort of sausage shape, and then I'm going to wrap it up. I'll take the back pieces first and fold those over the top like that, and then just press it firmly down. Then do the same with this piece, push that over, press that firmly down. All these little flaps at the end, they just get sort of tucked under, and we're going to trim those off when it comes out of the oven. Now we're going to turn it over right way up so the seam is on the back of the baking sheet like that. Don't worry when you do that if a few little bits of almonds poke through or stick out, because they're going to look very pretty when it's cooked in the oven. Now this goes into a preheated oven, gas mark 5 or the equivalents. It'll take about 45 minutes to cook, and you just need to put a little bit more butter on it before it goes into the oven, and then you'll have a beautiful, crunchy, crispy strudel. Remember not to worry if the pastry breaks a bit and the nuts poke through, because during the cooking the layers separate and give this beautiful crisp golden flaky texture. Dust it with some sifted icing sugar and serve it warm from the oven, best of all I think with my own recipe for cinnamon ice cream. If you're one of those people who long for the good old-fashioned flavour of a real free-range chicken, and you don't want something as big as a goose or a turkey at Christmas, then I think you should opt for a pheasant, because pheasant has all the flavour of the wild still in it. It's one of the few birds that still really have good flavour. Now before you actually cook a pheasant, you need to get the right kind of pheasant for however you're going to cook it. And there are 2 things to remember. First of all, you must have a good supplier that you trust. And if you don't have a supplier and you're just getting a pheasant from somebody who's been out on a shoot, then you need to know whether it's going to be an old pheasant or a young pheasant. Now, an old one will taste beautiful, but it needs long, slow casserole cooking, and a young one will be all right for roasting. Now, the way to tell is to have a look at the feet, and then just up above the feet you'll find a little horny thing called a spur. If it's long, then it's an older pheasant, and if it's short and stubby, then it's a younger pheasant, and that would be okay for roasting. Now what I've got here are two young pheasants that are going to be roasted, and I want to show you a way of roasting them that's a little bit different. They're wrapped in muslin, and this keeps them nice and moist and juicy. Now you start off with some butter, and for two pheasants you need about 5 ounces altogether, and it should be room temperature. And what you do is plaster the butter all over the pheasant, and this will melt into the pheasant and into the muslin whilst it's cooking, and keep the bird really nice and moist and full of juices. Spread it over like that. Then you put some, I think I'll have just a little bit more on the thighs there. Then you put some salt and freshly milled pepper. This is pepper going on first. A little bit of salt. And then I'm going to put even more moisture on, and that's some bacon. 4 rashers of streaky bacon over the top of the breast. That's just to keep it even more moist while it's cooking. And then the pheasant is going to be wrapped up in a parcel in muslin. And I've got a piece of muslin here that's actually 18 inches square. And what I'm going to do is just pop the pheasant onto the centre of the muslin, first of all, like this. Then bring one side up over the top, like that. Press it down so to stick with the butter. And then just put a few little bits of thyme in between the layers of muslin, which imparts a nice sort of fragrance while it's cooking, gives a little bit of extra flavour there. Then you bring the other piece of muslin over the top, tuck the ends underneath, and here you've got a nice little parcel of pheasant which is ready to go into the oven. So we'll let that join the other one now. Now they go into a preheated oven, gas mark 8, and they'll need 20 minutes at the high temperature. Then you turn it down to gas mark 5 or the equivalents and let them finish cooking. Now halfway through the cooking time, you need to hike the pheasants out and give them a nice basting with all the buttery juices. So take them out of the oven, and then using a nice long draining spoon, like this one, you just collect all the juices in the spoon and begin to baste it. Now remember that I said it has 20 minutes cooking at the high temperature. Then you reduce it down to number 5, and you give it a further 40 minutes or so. Might need 45, might need 50. But the basting is important. It's what old-fashioned cooks always did, was baste and baste and baste, and that's why cooking used to taste so succulent. Right, back into the oven now, and then they can just finish cooking. One of the nicest things to serve with roast pheasant is a good old-fashioned bread sauce, and we're going to be coming to that later on in the series. But at the moment, I'd like to show you a new recipe. This is one called Cranberry and Onion Confit. And you start off in a big, large cooking pot like this with 2 ounces of butter, which you melt over a gentle heat. And then to the butter, you add 2 pounds of onions. And these onions have been very, very finely chopped. I've actually chopped these in the food processor. If you haven't got a food processor, you better have a big box of tissues, because 2 pounds of onions to chop is quite a lot. So they go in to the 2 ounces of butter. Give them a stir, and then add 2 cloves of garlic crushed and 2 ounces of sugar. Now you keep the heat fairly low, and the first stage of this sauce is to let those onions take on a nice golden colour, and that'll take about 10 minutes altogether. When the onions have softened and turned golden, you add a spice. This is cardamom pods, and they've been crushed with a pestle and mortar. There's about 4 pods there, and you just get rid of the little husks, and that should yield about 1/4 teaspoon of cardamom flavour, which gives a lovely fragrance. The next thing I've got here is 1/4 teaspoon of coarsely crushed peppercorns and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And then I'm going to add the juice of an orange, a nice juicy orange. and the grated zest of the orange. And then 1/4 pint of red wine vinegar, that goes in next. Give it all a little stir. And then the most important ingredient of all, the cranberries, and I've got 8 ounces of cranberries here, fresh cranberries. So they go in next. Very Christmassy ingredient, cranberries, very Christmassy colour. Now that needs to cook for about 15 minutes until the cranberries have burst and released all their juices, and the way to do that, to speed it up, is to put a lid on. After about 15 minutes, you take the lid off, and you can see now the cranberries have burst and everything's beginning to look a lovely pink colour. And now you leave it with the heat very, very low, and this time without a lid for a further 40 minutes, so that it reduces down to a nice thick mass. And here we have the finished cranberry and onion confit, and the reason it's called that is because it is like a thick marmalade. There's no liquid left in here at all, and the flavour has become really concentrated. So I'll just turn the heat out now, and you probably will have noticed that there's too much there to serve with 2 pheasants. But I like to make a large amount, more than I need, because it keeps in a screw-top jar in the refrigerator. It's lovely to have it tucked away there at Christmas, because it's delicious served with cold game, and I like it actually with good old bangers. As well as the confit, serve the roast pheasants with a light gravy made with the pan juices and some stock made with the giblets. And a reminder that older pheasants need to be cooked more slowly. This is a really beautiful recipe in which the pheasants are first jointed, then braised in Madeira wine, along with herbs, shallots, lardons of bacon and dark gilled mushrooms. But what wine to serve with game? Alice King has some more ideas for us.
With really strongly flavoured food, what you need is a really strongly flavoured wine. So it's no good having a sort of light, elegant white, because you simply won't taste it.
So you'd never have a white wine with game then?
I wouldn't know, because it would just be a waste. So what you're looking for is a wine that complements the flavour. And the grape variety that springs to mind is the Syrah grape. Now this is a black grape variety that produces really black, inky coloured wine.
Yes, I can see that. It does look dark.
That has a really, really strong aroma. It's sort of really spicy, almost gamey actually.
Yes, I know what you mean.
Syrah first became well known in the Rhône Valley, the northern Rhône, where it produces great wines like Hermitage, Crozes Hermitage, and also a lesser known one, therefore better value, Saint Joseph.
Oh, that's a lovely title for a wine for Christmas, isn't it? Easy to remember.
That's right. Now this is made from 100% Syrah, and you'll find that this wine is very powerful, very tannic. Now, tannin is the bitter flavour like you find in tea, and that comes from the grape skins and the pips. But you need that sort of harsh, bitter flavour to cope with the gamey flavour in the dishes.
Right.
If you don't want such a full-bodied Syrah and you've got less well-hung game, look for a Syrah from the south of France. And in the case of these 2 wines, you see they're very helpful. They actually list the grape variety on the label, whereas with the Rhône, they just expect you to know it's made from Syrah.
Yeah, you wouldn't know that was Syrah.
Exactly.
No, great.
And these 2, not only are they made from Syrah, but they're about £2.50, £3 a bottle. So they're much better value, whereas the Rhônes, good Rhônes, are sort of £6, £8, £10. Alternatively, you could follow the grape variety to Australia, where it changes its name, just to be more confusing, and it's known as Shiraz.
I see.
But in Australia, there's much more sunshine, so the resulting wine is slightly sweeter, much softer, doesn't have all the tannin and the bitter flavour of the Northern Rhône one. And therefore, if you're not used to drinking really powerful reds, this is the best wine to start with.
So if you're somebody who really likes whites, that would be a good red to start off with strong foods. Yeah.
If you smell it, you can actually smell the sunshine in this wine, because it almost smells chocolatey.
It's definitely much lighter than that one, isn't it? But I know which one I prefer. I like the sort of the big gutsy one.
The Saint Joseph.
Yeah, I do. Next time, we're moving on from game to goose, and we'll be cooking a roast goose with prunes in Armagnac and a spicy apple stuffing. And because we're now entering the pre-Christmas party season, I'm going to be showing you a fork supper for 12 people and lots of canapes to serve with drinks. So I hope to see you then.